Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords, and as you can see, I'm talking to you from my hallway here, not hallway, my back alley, I guess you could say, or my front alley, and down there is Meatball. I hope the audio is coming out okay. I come out here occasionally when I've got a topic that I really don't want to include with an image of one of my books, you know, and I guess this is one of them. So here I am. So basically, I was first prompted about making this video because I've had a lot of people post comments on my videos. People that have, for the most part, a bit of an agenda, you know. People commenting, mentioning this game by Varg Vikernes called Myfarog, right? Which, for those of you who don't know, Varg Vikernes is a literal neo-Nazi, a literal murderer. He's someone who actually killed someone. He was probably responsible for the burning down of some churches because he's like a pagan, you know, like there's some a certain number of actual literal neo-Nazis are Christian, allegedly, and then there's the ones like Varg, apparently, who are like pagan, allegedly. He worships, I don't know, the Aesir, I guess, you know, the Norse gods, you know, Thor and Beta Ray Bill and all of those guys. But anyway, so he's done prison time and then he's produced an RPG, right? And this RPG is exactly what you'd expect from a guy with his views. And I wasn't ever planning on talking about it in a video because I thought it would give him some unworthy. Oh, look here. Oh, Lordy, look who's coming. It's Big Chungus. Come on, Chungus. Come on. Hey. Anyway, I didn't want to give any publicity to Vikernes, right? I don't think he deserves it. But there was another topic that had come up, and basically in a discussion about certain other games, it's led me to change my mind. And so I want to talk about what's wrong with games that are basically racialist games. There are some games which have been produced largely for ideological reasons, which are meant to push a certain kind of agenda, right? We know this from long ago. I mean, there was like, what was it called? Dragon Raid, the Christian RPG back in the 80s. And there have been others that were, you know, not parody games, not fantasy games, but serious games that were alleging, I don't know if that's good. That's the neighbors. Hey, hey, Meatball, monkey, come on. You're going to knock that flower pot over. Jesus. Anyways, I can't take these cats anywhere. So there were these games that were set up with a particular agenda, which is different than a game that has a specific topic, right? So, for example, Paranoia is a kind of pseudo-comedy game about post-apocalyptic paranoia. And for the most part, I mean, sometimes it does veer into politics in certain editions. And you could say it does have a slight sort of message. For the most part, it's very clearly intended to be humorous, right? And, you know, you can have games about all kinds of cultures, right? There's nothing wrong with having a game if you had an RPG about Vikings, for example. You know, that wouldn't make you a neo-Nazi. But there are certain qualities that some games have that have sprung up mostly in the last few years. I can't really think of one that is earlier than this, right? So, which is funny. Like, let's start with Myfarog, just because it was the first one that I brought up. This is a game that does pretty much everything that SJWs accuse falsely D&D of doing, right? SJWs like to pretend that D&D is some kind of a white supremacist game where you play white heroes that go around killing thinly veiled metaphors for black people, right? Except that's, anyone who's ever played D&D knows that's not D&D at all. That's not at all what it is, So it's a complete misrepresentation. But in the case of Myfarog, it wouldn't be really. Because, see, Myfarog is this game where it's set in the legendary realm of Thule, mostly legendary because of the Thule Society and the Aryan Osophists of the early 20th century, which were the precursors of basically National Socialist weird mystical ideologies. You found a rope, Chungus. What are you doing with that? What are you doing with that rope? Look at you with that rope. This is exciting action filming I'm doing. Oh, look, even more exciting now. Oh my. It looks like Meatball has discovered that Chungus found the rope, and now there's all kinds of drama going on here. So anyways, the Thule setting has long been seen as this like mythical, legendary birthplace of the true, pure Aryan race, right? And in the game, you play heroic Aryan warriors mostly. It could also be like a wizard, priest of the Norse gods or whatever. And you could, I think one reviewer said, you can be any race you want as long as it's Scandinavian, right? It's wide open. And then the people that you're fighting, I mean, there are some monsters and stuff, right? But the main gist of the game is that you are opposing these races that the game literally describes in literal text as subhuman. So specifically the Darklings and the Coppermen, the Darklings are, you guessed it, basically black people. They have bonuses to spear throwing. I mean, you can't make this garbage up, right? And then the Coppermen are described as weak humans that are conniving and traitorous and backstabbing. One of the organizations that these Coppermen have, like when their goal to infiltrate and destroy society is literally called the Sikari, which was of course a Jewish revolutionary organization during the first century. That's where the name Judas Iscariot comes from. Look at that cat go. Jesus. Lightning fast. I mean, I don't know if the game describes Coppermen as hook-nosed, but if not, that would be like the only thing missing from the National Socialist stereotype, the libel, complete with, they do sacrifice rituals. Like it's the most disgusting thing you could possibly read, And this asshole has put this in this game, and your characters, like one of the campaign scenarios, if this is not clear, right? One of your campaign scenarios is you can go and go on a heroic crusade to like exterminate all of the Coppermen and Darkling invaders, So this is literally a neo-Nazi fantasy RPG. Right, like not in the sense of, well, I mean, it is fantasy in the sense of it has magic and monsters, but also in the sense of a wish fulfillment fantasy, right? And this is very different from any typical type of fantasy RPG because it's, Big Chungus has had enough. Big Chungus is entering the building. This is very different from other standard fantasy RPGs because its purpose really is to create an imaginary world that never was, right? Like, how does this differ from something like Pendragon? Well, Pendragon is a game actually based on myths, right? On actual legends. It presents people, the characters, in the way that mythology does. This isn't mythology, what happens in Myfarog. In Myfarog, what you have is propaganda, right? There's a very important difference, right? Mythology is largely about the flaws of men, right? And about struggles of that revealing of human nature, right? Whereas racialist mythologizing is always triumphalist, right? There's a reason also it's not historical play, right? Lion and Dragon is meant to be a historical, with fantasy elements, but a historically authentic recreation of the Middle Ages. Myfarog doesn't recreate anything that ever really happened in history. It recreates a pseudo-history legend of a world that never actually existed, of a myth that was invented as propaganda to replace real myth in the 19th century by a group of explicit racial supremacists. Okay, so it's a pretty disgusting concept. I've also heard that mechanically it's not that great, but that's kind of irrelevant to anything else that the point is, right? What is offensive is the setting and the material in it. So this game, one of the problems with these kind of racialized games is you'll never see them do something based on history, because of course history doesn't suit their storyline, right? One of the things that they mention explicitly in the book, for example, is that the nobles of the true Aryans are always perfect and good and in every way flawless, right? And that actually, like in the game, the aristocrats are children of the gods, and they're just so perfect. Right? And the thing is that one of the parts, mythologizing, is one of the parts that you end up doing that creates this pseudo history and this invented narrative of a world that not only never was, but that could not be, right? So Myfarog doesn't do a game about real Germanic history, for example, Scandinavian history, because it's ultimately going to be embarrassed by it, because that real history has too many, darkling spots that would not actually represent the imaginary perfection that he wants to attribute to Aryan people, right? And so it's I think it's a bad trend. I'm not one to often criticize trends in RPGs, as you well know, but I think it's a very bad trend, and something that needs to be condemned on all sides when you have people creating these kind of racialist agenda RPGs, like Myfarog, or like certain other racialist RPGs. For example, I've been told now that there's this game that has just funded an awful lot of money on Kickstarter called Coyote Crow, I believe, and it's basically a game that is meant to be a Native American RPG with Native American indigenous people. I don't know how you'd call it, what they would prefer to be termed. Big Chungus, what's she doing? But look at her waddle away. But anyways, the issue of the game is that it's being created by indigenous people, and that it's going to use indigenous myth and indigenous stories, and that's going to make it so wonderful, right? And okay, that all sounds really good, except that what they do is end up creating a kind of their setting is this kind of mythical utopia that never was, where is a couple of centuries before Columbus would have shown up, some kind of meteor crashes on Earth and kills all the white people. And I'll be fair, they say we don't know and we don't care what happened to the white people, but it was kind of evident from the text apparently that the meteor was supposed to have fallen on Europe, right? So that means that there was never a Columbian exchange. There was never, the discovery of America by the Europeans, and there wasn't any colonialism. And that means 700 years later, you have this super advanced society, right? Why? Nobody knows. Well, actually, they do. They have to explain something like how why cultures that weren't able to maintain sufficiently advanced status for sufficiently long to create stable civilizations would suddenly be able to. It's magic stuff that fell from the meteor, right? That gives people superpowers, right? It's basically Native American Wakanda, right? And why do they make it this way? Well, they make it this way because they need to maintain a propagandistic imagery of this fake story, right? The fake story being that Native American people lived in this idyllic and peaceful and wonderful culture, combination of cultures throughout the continent, that there was peace and everybody was happy until the evil white men came along, right? And conquered and killed everyone and enslaved people and brought suffering to this world, which is a complete lie, right? The world that you had before the Columbian Exchange was a world of constantly warring tribes. I mean, there were some places that were nicer than others, right? But the Plains Indians were constantly fighting each other, right? There was, there are Indian tribes that we don't know the real names of because we only know the names of that their enemies gave them, and the names mean like not human, right? Not people, right? So they were basically wiped out, right? You had, and then of course where Cortez showed up there with the Aztecs, right? The Spaniards tried to present this kind of legend, which is also not true, that, Cortez and 100 dudes or 200 dudes in plate mail were able to subject an empire of millions just because they were so awesome and had God on their side. But that's not what happened either. Actually, Cortez was quite clever in a way that he figured out fairly quickly that the Aztecs were brutal, murderous imperialists that everybody around them despised. So he went and he got all of these tribes that the Aztecs had been subjugating, that hated the Aztecs, that the Aztecs were using for slavery and for human sacrifice, massive amounts of human sacrifice. And he told them, hey, come with me and we'll kill all the Aztecs, right? And they were like overjoyed. They didn't care, it's not that they thought, they weren't stupid. They didn't think that he was a god, right? They might have done some propaganda about that at some point, right? About the idea of these pale men that might be gods or something. But anybody who would have met the Spaniards would have known that they weren't gods. They did it because it was the enemy of their enemy, right? And they knew that whatever the heck these guys were offering, it couldn't be as bad as what the Aztecs were doing, And it, considering the difference of how eventually the Western civilization went, they got the better end of the deal, right? And it's a similar case in the game made by that Swordsfall dude, right? That Tikor or whatever. In his game, it's Afrofuturism, which is always a kind of fantasy fulfillment. And it's all these are always things where they have to put up the question of making up, just like Myfarog. These are woke Myfarog games, right? They're exactly the same thing, but for woke people. A large number of the supporters of these Kickstarter projects were white people who want to feel like they're showing how woke they are, but at the same time expressing this agenda, this propaganda that says, wouldn't the world be so much better without white people in it? This Coyote Crow creates a world that it's not a utopia exactly, but it's a world that is clearly meant to be so much better than the Western world we have today because a meteor killed all the white people. And in Tikor, I think it's called, the setting of the Swordsfall product, it's a world where it's all, every culture is basically black dominant in terms of demographics, and he doesn't. From what I saw of the text of what is left, because unfortunately a lot of his stuff has now disappeared after Swordsfall fell into disrepute and scandal and got canceled everywhere by his fellow SJWs. But from what I've seen of it, an awful lot of the Tikor stuff doesn't really focus in any way which is a kind of a good touch on, white people or something like that. They're not the bad guys the way that you have in Myfarog. So I will note that in that sense, it is somewhat of a better product. It's hard to be a worse product than Myfarog, right? You don't want to put you don't want to have a big banner on the top of your product that says a less horrible product than Myfarog. That if that's all you can claim, you're not doing well. But yeah, he says, oh yeah, there are white people in the setting, but if you look at the art and things like that, none of the cultures, you look at the leaders, the rulership of all the cultures, they're all black. So it's not that there isn't a specifically culture there that isn't, the cultures are all based on different kind of African cultures with some serious modifications. And obviously things like super science and incredible magic, right? So once again, Wakanda, right? And the only image out of tons and tons of Swordsfall images that I saw about this Tikor setting that had a white person was the image of a goddess named Janet, I think it was. And that was because she paid, I don't know how much money, I'm presuming, hundreds of dollars at least, but probably more, to this dude in order for her to appear. It was one of these Kickstarter specials, right? You pay X amount of money and you appear as a character, and we'll even do an illustration of you in the book, right? So he was forced to do an illustration of this white woman in order to, because she had given him a lot of money to do it, right? That's the only white person in all of Tikor, apparently. But yeah, these games are games that I think are fundamentally unhealthy to society, right? They're fundamentally destructive of Enlightenment values. They represent divisiveness, and beyond that, in terms of depth, they suck, right? Because the problem with propaganda as setting is that propaganda always has to be simplistic in ways way beyond anything else has to be simplistic, right? You don't have to be simplistic with myth. Myth can become very complex, right? You don't have to be simplistic with history. History is super complicated, right? But with, you can have lots of general trends in both of those, but then also have lots of subtleties, right? There's nothing subtle about a meteor kills all the white people, or black people and Jews are evil subhuman invaders or something like that, right? Those are disgusting, hideous concepts that are not they have no attempt to provide any depth whatsoever. So this is entertainment for stupid and hateful people, and I guess that's what I had to say about it. I don't care what type of racialism it is, right? There's no racialist fantasy that would be a good fantasy. It would be bad morally, but it would also be bad artistically as a setting, right? It wouldn't be credible and that's why all of these settings have to go into these implausible scenarios, right? Or fall back into pseudo legends, right? They can't hack anything real because they know that it's not real, right? They know that it wouldn't be something that actually can be proven in history. Yeah, if you want to do a realistic RPG about, it would be awesome to have a realistic RPG about indigenous American cultures and civilizations in a century before Columbus shows up, right? And how you could do all kinds of research about it. There'd be fantastic stuff. You could include legends, you could include magic, you could include all this stuff. But what you'd have to present is a really brutal and bloodthirsty world, which is what the Americas were before Columbus showed up, right? And that ruins the propagandistic simplicity of this agenda of saying it was paradise and then the evil white man came, right? And it's, you could do a realistic Afro-futuristic setting, I would imagine, or Afro-futuristic fantasy or something like that. But that would require some levels of accounting for the fact that you can't just it can't just be made into a triumphalism of a race, because all human beings are basically the same flawed people that make the same mistakes, right? So what these racialized settings try to do is they try to change the nature of history, the realities of history, and they try to change the nature of human nature to make some people more perfect and pure, and that anything that's bad about them is the product of what others have done to them, and then make other people completely horrible and unsavable. Yeah, and so that's a serious problem. Anyway, this is the only video I'm going to do about this product. I hope that all of you, all of you who were name dropping Myfarog in my comments in the hopes that it would give it attention or something. Well, here you are. Now you've had attention. Your game is as bad. It's actually worse, slightly worse, but worse than Coyote Crow or Swordsfall. And that sucks too. I was saying, it's pretty bad when the best thing you can say about your game is it sucks slightly less than Myfarog. But to be the game that says I suck more than something Swordsfall made, that's really, really terrible, isn't it? And it's all the same. It's all pathetic little people that want to create this narrative of racial division and hatred, instead of trying to do something actually creative that looks at humans and society and history and folklore and legend in a sophisticated way. And in an interesting way. Because the worst crime that these places have is that I don't think any of them are particularly entertaining in terms of playability, because they have to present an unrealistic world with unrealistic people in it. Anyway, I guess that's it for today. If you like the video, please feel free to share it. Share it wherever anyone's going to get pissed off about it. And oh my Lord, I bet a bunch of people are going to get pissed off by this one. I'm probably going to get a lot of dislikes. I don't know if you've heard, but YouTube is planning to start to hide the dislikes. I object to that, first of all, because they're only doing it because, Disney and the Biden White House is tired of having a million dislikes on every video, which they obviously deserve. But second, because anybody, I'm super happy whenever anyone likes my videos, and I thank everyone who does. But whenever someone dislikes my videos, that means that I've pissed off somebody horrible, some kind of horrible person, and that makes me happy too, right? So feel free to share this video anywhere. If you haven't already subscribed, then feel free to subscribe and check out my other videos. And if you want to support me, I've got a PayPal and a Patreon. The links are in the description below. But if you want to support me and get something back for yourself at the same time as you're supporting me, check out my various RPGs. The links are all in the description below. There's everything from full-sized RPG books that'll cost maybe $30. My RPGs are never super expensive, all the way down to RPG Pundit Presents, which is my PDF series. There's 104 issues of RPG Pundit Presents, and each issue is somewhere between 99 cents and $4.99. And it'll give you, really interesting content that you can use in your D&D OSR or tabletop RPG fantasy game. And it's like you're buying me a coffee, right? So any of those are welcome ways to support me, and it's a way to get something for yourself too. So feel free to check all that out, and more than anything, subscribe and share this video. Thank you very much. Currently smoking Stanwell Deluxe plus Argento Natural.